Have you ever heard of GitHub but thought it's not for me or it's only for programmers? Well, in this first lecture, I'm going to show you the most easy way you can start leveraging GitHub to store and share your data and make your research more open and reproducible. Welcome to this first episode of this series of tutorials on GitHub. I am Dominik Makowski, a neuropsychologist researching the perception of reality at the University of Sussex. And if you're a PhD student, a master's, a postdoc, or even a full professor, and you want to learn one of the most valuable tools to boost your productivity and improve your science, then this course is for you. One of the things to say, though, is that GitHub is surrounded by many myths. You might have heard things like GitHub is for programmers, or GitHub is hard to get into, or you might believe that you don't even have a reason to learn and use GitHub. Well, I think that GitHub can really be useful to anyone, and we will cover some of the reasons in a bit. And also, GitHub does not need to be complicated. So there are ways of interacting with it that indeed can be considered a bit more advanced. But in this tutorial, I'm going to show you the most basic way to interact with it. There is, however, a steep learning curve to GitHub, and I believe there are two reasons for it. One is that it has quite an idiosyncratic vocabulary, meaning that there are words that are used within the GitHub framework that are not the most transparent, and we will see them as we go along the tutorial. And also, the online help can be quite confusing because a lot of it is oriented for programmers and uses a way of interacting with GitHub that is not the most straightforward. So it uses things like command lines from the terminal and so on, which many of us don't really need. So when creating a GitHub account, you will need to pick a username. And for this, I would recommend going with something that is simple and professional, such as your first name and your last name. There is a practical reason for it, is that this will create a natural link between your research profile and your GitHub profile, meaning that when people look for your name online, they will naturally be led into your GitHub content. The other thing to consider is that your name, your account name, will feature in all the GitHub links URL of all the projects that you have. So it's best to pick something neutral. And finally, note that it is also possible for any profile to belong to different organizations and to technically host different projects under these organizations, in which case the name of the organization will be featured in the URL. So when you visit a repository on github.com, it typically looks like this. The first thing to notice is the URL path at the top, which is github.com/ the name of your account / the name of the repository. Then you can find different buttons. The main ones are the issues button, which leads you to the page where you can create issues on various repositories, as well as the settings button, the last one, from which you can set up different aspects. Then you have the content proper. So this is the space that lists the different files and folders that make up your GitHub repository. And finally, at the bottom, you will find the README file displayed. So every GitHub repository by default starts with a README document. So it's called README in capital case .md for Markdown. And this is what contains usually some kind of description of the repository. And the content of this README is nicely displayed by default on the main page of every GitHub repository. So now we are going to cover the two most basic ways to interact with a GitHub repository. And that means to essentially download things from it. So imagine that someone sends you the link of their GitHub repositories and says, you can find my data and my scripts and everything on this repository. So they send you the URL and you end up on this page. So one thing that you can do is essentially download the whole folder, the whole repository. Imagine you want to rerun the analysis or you want to really have everything on your computer. You can download the whole thing at once. And for this, you click on the green button, code, and then you can download as a zip. And once you click on it, it will initiate a download of basically all the files that you can then extract on your computer. However, this is sometimes quite inconvenient because the repositories can get quite big and often you don't want to download everything. You are just interested in one particular file. So imagine I just want to download some analysis scripts. So I would go to the folder, navigate to, for instance, this script functions.r, which is an R script. And then for each file, there is also a download raw file button that you can click again, and this will initiate the download of that particular file. So to summarize, there are two ways to download anything from GitHub. You can download the full repository by clicking on the green button and then download a zip, or you can download any specific file by going on that file and then click the download button. So when you log into GitHub after creating your account, you will reach the landing page, and usually you have a green button here that says new repository. So click it to create a new repository. So a couple of information about repositories. The first thing to know is that you can have pretty much as many as you want. So the organization is up to you. I would recommend personally creating one repository per study that you're running or per project. The first thing that you need to decide is what name to give your repository. So again, here I would strongly advise to use informative names that directly provide information about the content of that repository. And this is rather than something more internal. And this is for two reasons. One is that it will be easier for future you to remember. And the second reason is that it makes it also easier to discover by others, and it works better as a showcase of your different projects. There are some conventions that exist about how we name things, and so the main thing is here to be consistent. So if you use camel case, that means no spaces, but every word with starting with an uppercase. Or if you use snake case, which is with underscores between the names, just stay consistent. Keep in mind also that a project can be later renamed or deleted, so it's not a big commitment to find the perfect name right now. And then you have some options for visibility. And there's two main types. There are public repositories and private repositories. So this is one of the positive aspects of GitHub, is that many people believe that if it's on GitHub, meaning it must be open, and many people again don't want to make everything open from the start. So it is entirely possible to create private repositories that only you or your collaborators have access to, and you can eventually make them public at any point in time or never. I have a lot of private repositories for my personal data or my personal non-published content. Then you can start with adding a default file to that repository. So I would always tick the add readme button on. This adds a readme.md file, which is useful because this kind of creates this summary of what can be found in that repository. So it starts as, usually it is just empty, so it will be up to you to then add information to it. And then the .gitignore files are files that are meant to hide folders from GitHub. So this is quite an advanced use. But essentially, one of the usage of GitHub is that you have your folder locally, and then you sync it with the online version. And you can have on that local folder files that you don't want to sync with GitHub, and so then these files will be added to that gitignore file. And then there is also an option to specify some license, which you can ignore. So how do we, after a repository has been created, how do we upload anything to it? So the easiest way is to directly add things via direct upload on the GitHub website. So once you go to your website, you can click through your repository, you can find the button Add File, and then there is another button that says Upload Files. And it will open a very easy drag and drop menu, and you can then drag and drop any file that you want, and then click on Commit Changes. So in the GitHub kind of language, in Git language, commit means essentially to update or to save. So if you commit the changes, it will save them and then push these changes, meaning it will upload them or sync them with the GitHub repository. So a commit can contain multiple changes in multiple files, and each commit should have ideally an informative name. Even though in practice, if you look at the history of many repositories, you will find commit names like edit 1, edit 2, why is this not working, and so on. But usually, ideally, you want every commit to be an informative name. For instance, changed this in that file. And this is because these commits is what will constitute the history of your repository. So if you want to go back at any point in time, it is useful to have a commit name with an informative name so that you know that this is the place that you want to go back to. And you can also add a more extended description to each commit. Now, one thing to keep in mind or to mention now is that each repositories can have essentially multiple parallel versions of itself. And these parallel versions are referred to as branches. So technically in one repository, you have two branches, which are two parallel versions, and they are both part of your repository. And the reason of having these different parallel versions is that very often one is considered to be the main one, or the kind of the master branch, meaning the one that users reach by default. And then you can do some work, it could be, for instance, the stable version, and then you can do some work on a development branch in which you can be not worried about breaking things or anything, because it doesn't affect the live main branch. And every now and then you can make what is called a pull request to update the main branch from that parallel branch. But we will see this later in the future advanced tutorials. So how does it work in practice? So here I am on the main page of my newly created repository. So you can see the URL is Dominik Makowski, which is my username /demo repo. And it created this README file, readme.md, which shows here. And it is mostly empty. It only has the title of the repository. So let's say I want to add a data file. So I will go to Add File, create an upload file, and then I will go to my computer and drag and drop a file called mydata.csv, CSV being a standard to share data. So I will add a commit name, which is I added a data file. Again, you can write pretty much anything you want. I won't bother with adding an extended description. The short one is clear enough. And then I can click commit directly to the main branch, because here we don't want at this stage to deal with other branches. And then commit changes. So it is processing the file, and now you can see that I have the mydata.csv file here on the repository. And if I click on it, you can see that it will nicely show it as a table. So now that we have files on our repository, how can we modify them? So obviously moving forward, we will see a more advanced way to link a repository to a local folder where you can do modifications as you do in general, and then simply update these modifications to GitHub. But you can also modify files directly on the GitHub website, and this is very convenient for little edits. So here again on the main page of my repository, and I'm going to modify the README. So the easiest way is simply to click on that file, which will show that file, and then click on the Edit this file button showed by a little pen. So if I click on it, you will see that it opens an editable and slightly different view in which the title is not shown anymore as a title in bold and with a bigger font, but it is showed with a hash, and this is standard in the markdown format for titles. And so the markdown format in general is very, very prevalent on GitHub, but also all over the internet. So it's very useful to get familiar with the markdown format, which you can use to, stylize easily your documents. So here I'm going to add a little description. For instance, this repo is an example, and I'm going to put repo with 2 asterisks, which will then render as italic. And I can also add a subtitle with 2 hashes saying it contains various things. So once we finished editing, we will once again commit these changes. So we can see that AI is already suggesting to us some commit messages, which is very helpful. So we're just going to go ahead and commit them. Great. Now if I go back to the main URL of my repository, you can see that these changes have been saved and now show in the description panel of my repository. So the next very important concept is that of role views. And we've already covered this just now. When we clicked on the README file, you can see that this document, this README file, showed up nicely formatted. It showed title as titles, it showed italic as such, and it showed subtitles as smaller. But this is not how the file actually is. As you've seen, the file is simply a text file that contains hashes for titles and stars for different formatting options. So how can we see for any file its raw form, its kind of unrendered form? So you can, to do this, you can click on the raw button next to a file, and when you do this, it will actually show just that file in its purest raw form. So you can see here, this is exactly what we edited. And you can see also, notice that the URL slightly changed. It is not github.com/Dominik Makowski anymore. It is now raw.githubusercontent.com. So what we have covered so far is already very convenient. If during your research, you generate any kind of documents, any analysis scripts, maybe some data, any images or files, you can create a repository for that project and you can upload your documents there. And if they are on a private repository, that's already useful, because that means you are not worried about losing them anymore or replacing them. They are safely stored in the cloud. And if you decide to make that public, that folder, that repository public, then you can easily share the links, share the link of that repository to other people, and they can then download the repository, access all your files, or you can show them specific files as well. And now let's talk about one of the advanced features that is heavily underused. Most people don't know it actually exists, but it's very convenient for anybody that works with data analysis, with scripts, with R or Python scripts. So imagine you're sending your repository to someone and they decide to download that data file and pop them on their computer. And let's say they create an analysis script, or they have an analysis script. So in this case, we are using R within Quarto, but it works pretty much just the same in Python or Julia or any other language. So once they have that local file on their computer, that means they can, well, the script can be, is reproducible. So they can, in this case, if it's a court document, it is a system that contains code as well as text. And when we render it, it kind of puts everything together. And you can see that here it successfully worked. We have this line here that says read the local data file that we just downloaded, and then plot a histogram. What that means in practice is that if you have your analysis scripts on GitHub as well, someone that downloads your GitHub repository, they will have the data and then will have the script, and then they can directly reproduce it. But it is even better. What if someone doesn't want to download your data locally and would like to directly access it from GitHub? So instead here of having the URL of a local file, you can technically replace that with the raw URL of your data, and it will work. So let's do that together. I'm going back on my repository, and I will click on my data file that I uploaded earlier, mydata.csv. So when I click on it, as we mentioned, it opens it in a nicely rendered view. So it shows up as a table that is quite nice to look at, but it is not the file itself. It is a rendered view of the file. To access the file itself, we need to go to open that raw view by clicking on the raw button. So once we do this, you can see the file how it really is, which is a comma separated file. And we can then grab the URL that I mentioned, which starts with raw.githubusercontent, copy it, and then replace my local data by this URL. And again, the script will work just the same, but this time I don't need my data to be on my computer. That means that this script is in itself entirely portable. You can literally send that script as is to anybody, and the people will just be able to run it because it doesn't need anything else. The data is automatically downloaded from GitHub. When I rendered this document, this quarter document, it created an HTML file, which you can see here on my local folder. And if I double click, if I open this HTML file in a browser, it shows essentially as a local web page. And now I'm going to demonstrate another feature of GitHub, which is that of hosting websites. So I'm going to use this web page created automatically by Quarto, but it works with any HTML website. So if you create an HTML web page from scratch for, again, your project or your profile or anything, you can follow the same steps and it will work. So let's start with uploading this HTML file to GitHub. So I'm going to go to Add File, Upload Files, and then I'm going to drag and drop this HTML file into my folder. The commit name has been automatically picked, and I'm just going to save this. So now you can see that my repository has now 3 files: the README, the data file, as well as that report.html, which contains the data analysis report that I just created. So it would be nice if just clicking on that file was showing it, but it actually doesn't work like this, and HTML files are not rendered by default. So what you can see is actually the inside of that file, all the lines of code of HTML and CSS code that make up this file. So the question is there a way of being able to nicely view the rendered website? And obviously the answer is yes. And for this, we need to enable a GitHub page. So one thing to note is that this feature is only available for public repositories. So if you have a private repository, unless you have an advanced subscription, but you won't be able to host a free website. So if your repository is public, you can go to the settings. And then within the settings, you can find the Pages tab. And from that Pages tab, you need to click on Main. I think for me it's already selected, but it used to be none. You select the main branch, which means that the website will be served from whatever is on the main branch, and then you click on Save. Then you need to wait a bit, and if you refresh, normally it should show now this box saying that your site is live at, and it gives you a URL. Note that the URL is slightly different. Again, your repository is hosted on github.com/your username/the name of your repository, but the web page is hosted by the URL starts with your profile name, then .github.io for in and out, and then slash the name of your repository. So let's open this link in a new tab. So what you can see is that it shows the README, which is convenient, but it's not really what we want. And indeed, automatically, if in the absence of a landing page for the website, and that is an HTML page named index, it will fall back on showing the README. But what we want to show is actually that HTML file that we created. So if we go back to the repositories, the repository root, you can see that the HTML file that we uploaded is named report.html. So all I need to do to view that HTML is to see that file through the website, through the web page. So here I simply need to add the name of my file, report.html, and this will actually show you the rendered web page version of that file. And this is really great. What that means in practice is that if you are doing any data analysis, you can create a report, and if you're using R, you can do that in Quarto. If you're using Python or other languages, you can do this in Jupyter, for instance, in any kind of notebooks. And you can host these notebooks or these web pages on GitHub, and then you can have them rendered or hosted for free, and then you can simply share that web page to your collaborators, to as supplementary materials in your publications, and people can simply visit that web page and see all this data analysis report with all the figures, all the code. And this is really, really a wonderful way of sharing your data, and people don't even need to rerun your scripts. If you render the results, they can directly see them. So what have we seen today? We have seen that GitHub is a wonderful tool to share your research outputs for free. We have seen how we can create a profile, create a repository, upload anything directly on the website. We have also seen the difference between the rendered view and the raw view of a file. And the raw view is very useful to be able to reuse that content directly. And one of the examples that we have covered is for data files. We can then directly write the URL of the raw data or the raw URL of our data into a script, and this will download automatically that data. And so that makes any kind of scripts very portable, which is good for reproducibility. The other usage is, for instance, if you're hosting images on your GitHub repo and you want to reuse them from different websites, the raw URL is also the one that you want to use. And finally, we have seen that we can also host HTML pages on GitHub, and these HTML pages can then be viewed through the option, through the GitHub page features. So for any public repository, we go to the settings, we can enable this page, and then this page will point towards the root of the repository, and then any kind of HTML files that we have, we can directly navigate to these files and see them. And again, this makes it very convenient to share any kind of statistical reports. To avoid people to have to rerun your analysis, you can directly share the results with your supervisors, with your collaborators. And it is also useful to host pages, any website for your project, for yourself, or your team. So thanks for listening, and see you next time.